Hello, everybody. Welcome to an emergency podcast on the Penn State 365 podcast. My name is Don't Count Crowley, joined by our resident superfan here at the Penn State 365 podcast, part of PennState.Rivals.com, Happy Valley Insider. Anthony Hazan. Anthony, some big news here on Sunday night. Penn State backup quarterback Beau Pribula is entering the transfer portal and will be leaving the team immediately. Something that he says that the current NCAA postseason model creates a challenge for student athletes when it comes to the portal and the playoffs overlapping, and forced himself into a quote unquote impossible decision, something I think we both would agree with here. But Beulah is entering the transfer portal. He is not going to be with Penn State for the college football playoffs. I think there are some people who think Bo is an integral part of that offense, and I think there are some people who probably dislike the Bo Buell packages pretty heavily. I think you can argue that their usage at times was questionable, but nonetheless, he was a key part of the Penn State offense this year. And now Penn State's not going to have him for the college football playoffs, including this weekend against SMU, which it doesn't change a ton with the offense, but I think it changes enough that uh, it definitely is going to change the way that Andy Koltanicki calls this game on Saturday a bit, in my opinion. Maybe we see more Tyler and Warren Wildcat in the process, but before we dive into that, just what's your initial thoughts here on Beau Pribula entering the transfer portal here after 3 years with the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, I think it's a twofold decision here. Both people are leaving right now. I think for Penn State fans, there's good news potentially out of this, and there's bad news out of this. And obviously, I think we'll get into the ramifications potentially nationally of Beau Pribula leaving right now, and the transfer portal rules and how they currently sit, and how something like this could cause them to change. But I'm going to start with the potential good news. Is this probably gives you a good indication of where Drew Aller's leaning, because nothing's
Yeah,
been announced, and obviously if Penn State goes on a run and Drew Aller balls out and he starts skyrocketing up draft boards, yes, he of course could leave, but I truly
yeah,
don't think Beau Pribula is entering the transfer portal right now if he feels like he's competing for the starting job at Penn State next year.
right. That's where I stand on that too.
Yes. So the good news for Penn State is you feel, I'd say 90% confident that Drew Aller is probably leaning towards coming back next year, which is fantastic news for Penn State. Um,
Right.
on the flip side of that, the big negative is, yeah, you're not going to have him in the college football playoff. You're always one injury away from your backup quarterback being the most important player on your team. So that really stinks. And, also just, it's unfortunate timing for, Beau Pribula. And it just speaks to the current system that college football has in place for transfers and how it coincides with the playoff, and how it needs to be fixed. Because, yeah, Penn State loses their backup quarterback, and Beau Pribula, either has to make a tough decision of staying and potentially missing out on some opportunities for himself for next year,
Right.
or
Right.
leaving now and, leaving his team right before the playoff, which is something all these guys, train and practice and dream of playing in. So just a really tough situation. Everyone's going to have their opinions on it. I blame the system more than I blame the player. But, I get it. It sucks, and I'm sure Bo is feeling it more than anybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is, I agree with everything you said. Just, it does really put players in an impossible, uh, place when they, if, like you said, Bo's decision, I think, kind of probably speaks largely at what Drew Aller probably is leaning towards right now. Um, because if Drew was leaning towards leaving, I think Bo would be at least staying throughout the spring, and then competing with Ethan Grunkemeyer for the starting job next year. Uh, but if Drew is leaning towards returning, then yeah, it probably makes sense for Bo to enter the portal and go find a place he can start, since he's already spent 3 years of his career here. Uh, he has 2 years of eligibility left. If he wants any chance of playing at the next level, he needs to quickly go out and show what he can do over these next 2 years. And uh, you know, next year's a big part of that for him. And if he was not going to be in line for starting playing time at Penn State, then it makes sense for him to enter the portal now. Of course, Penn State, like you said and I said, loses a key backup here. It puts them kind of in a scary position depth-wise at quarterback. Uh, because Jackson Smolik, has been injured all season, which leaves Ethan Grunkemeyer, the true freshman, uh, as the next guy up there for Penn State if Drew would go down with an injury. And I don't know about you, Anthony, but I don't think Penn State really wants to put a true freshman out there in the college football playoffs, potentially against the likes down the road of, if they make it that far, perhaps a Georgia or Notre Dame. It certainly wouldn't be good against SMU or Boise State either. So it really is something I think the NCAA is going to have to look at going forward. And you look around here in the first hour since he entered the portal, and there's already a lot of national discourse amongst national writers about Beau entering and how the current system really does put players and teams in a very poor position during an integral part of the season. So it'll be interesting to see how this affects that discussion long term. Obviously, nothing's going to come of major change here in the near future, but perhaps Beau's decision here is one that does help spark a change. Because you and I talked about it before going live, but like Georgia has seen a bunch of players enter the transfer portal, but none of those players that I can remember are really guys who have a chance of impacting the game any given Saturday or whatever day the playoffs are. But Beau was a guy who could impact the game any given Saturday for Penn State, and now they're not going to have a key part of their offense going forward. And how does that affect the play calling for the rest of the offense? Does that affect how Drew, plays? Is he going to be less likely to take off and try to save his body? Because Penn State cannot afford Drew to get hurt in any manner before, but even now, especially with Beau gone, it's going to change parts of this Penn State offense for sure, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And I think, it makes it even more interesting because Penn State's competitor this weekend, SMU, their backup quarterback has also said that he's going to enter the transfer portal, Preston Stone, but he has said that he's waiting until after SMU's playoff run, however far that goes, before he enters the transfer portal. So, that makes things kind of like a direct comparison. Why some Penn State fans on social media are feeling like, well, he's staying, but Beau's going. What the hell? I understand it from that perspective too. I get it. It's just a tough situation. I do 100% agree with you. It's going to change the way Colton Nicky calls this offense. The Beau package obviously goes out the window for better or for worse, depending on how you feel about it. But I do wonder how it affects Drew's ability to run the football, like you said. Not the idea of getting hurt. Like, listen, it's the playoff. You're going to go all out in the playoff. You're going to call your best plays, and if that means Drew has to run sometimes, you're going to do it. But Beau being in there, did probably open some things up for Drew in terms of his ability to scramble and run the ball. So at least to some capacity. So, now that kind of takes something away from Drew. It did help a little bit for sure. But go ahead.
No, and even those plays where maybe Beau was on the field as a decoy, that those play calls are now out the window. You're not going to put Ethan Grunkemeyer out there as a decoy. Nobody's gonna buy that. But when Beau's out there, it's absolutely viable for or teams are forced to cover Beau in that situation. They don't have to cover Ethan Grunkemeyer if he's on the field.
At the very least, they forced the game plan for Beau Pribula.
Right.
He had to be ready for his legs, and as much as he didn't throw very much, he still could throw. Like, he wasn't the best thrower in the world. So no one's ever going to say he's a gunslinger. But, he made some throws that were like, all right, that's a good throw from Beau,
Yeah.
He wasn't a bad passer.
And I think going back to the Beau versus Preston Stone thing, Preston Stone, solid quarterback, grand scheme of things, but Beau entering the portal has automatically become one of the top quarterbacks available. And he is going to have a much bigger field of potential suitors for him than a Preston Stone. And especially monetary-wise, he has a much bigger, I guess you could say, risk for not entering the portal at this point. If he waits until after Penn State's playoff run is done, whether that's next Sunday or, January 21st or whenever it is after the national championship. That list of suitors could potentially change drastically for him. And, this is, again, one of those impossible decisions. But when you add, especially the NIL aspect of it into play, it's a potential life-changing decision for Pribula. Now, I have no idea what he was making at Penn State, as a backup quarterback, but one has to imagine he's going to get a pretty nice NIL deal from somebody to be their starting quarterback next season. And, it's a decision that I definitely wouldn't want to be put in. So that's my thought of the Pribula versus Stone aspect of it.
Yeah, I have two thoughts of my own. And the first one, you talk about the money, the NIL. It makes perfect sense from that perspective because, we don't know what goes on behind the scenes in these situations. And I have no idea what went on, if anything went on in this situation. But,
Right.
There's always back channeling. There's always talking going on, behind closed doors. We don't know if Pribula has, some interesting offers from some other schools and that
Right.
whatever NIL he would be getting would be dependent on, him leaving now, and
Yeah.
we don't know, and we'll probably never know, but it's something you got to keep in mind with all these transfers. And the other thing is, and I was saying this to some friends, before I started talking to you, quarterback is just so different from every other position. You're a running back, you're a receiver, you're a defensive lineman, whatever. You can go in the portal pretty much as late as you want, and you'll have 20, 25 teams, if you're good, knocking down your door.
A lot of starting opportunities for those.
Yes, exactly. Quarterback, there is one quarterback for one ball for one quarterback. The old adage, if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. And once a spot is gone in the portal, it's gone, and you're not going to get it back. So, Fortunately, and I'm glad Beau acknowledged this in his message on social media, he was put in an impossible situation between sticking with his guys for the playoff or claiming his spot on a team for next year and putting himself first. So I feel for him.
Yeah. I'm going to be very interested to see what James Franklin is going to be asked about this tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt. So I'm interested to see if he goes the route of not really commenting on it because Beau is now a former player. He's focused on SMU. Or if he kind of goes on one of those James Franklin, for lack of a better word, rants about how something within the system in general is broken and needs to be fixed. Considering how important Pribula is to Penn State's offense in the grand scheme of things, I think we may have a pretty interesting James Franklin rant tomorrow about the portal window, about the college football playoffs, and how it's not unfair just to teams, but it's unfair to players who are, on these teams competing to win national championships. So I'm very interested to see how that goes tomorrow for James Franklin. Could be I'm very intrigued to see what he says.
James Franklin in general is going to have a very interesting press conference tomorrow because obviously there was a situation with Jalen Reed where he posted on social media that it looked like he was in a car accident. Thankfully, it seems like he's okay. Nothing serious. Everyone's okay. Thank God. But there was that, and now you've got Beau Pribula entering the portal. James Franklin better be ready to answer questions tomorrow because he is going to be getting a lot of them.
Yeah, it's for what should have been, a rather, recruiting focused weekend for Penn State. It certainly has become a little bit more than that. You mentioned, the Jalen Reed news is a big one. Looked like a scary accident there. It looked like a T-bone on the driver's side. So I mean that's always a scary situation. You always got to worry about ribs and anything at that point. But it seems like he's going to be good to go for Saturday, which is has to be a sigh of relief for him and everybody involved. But obviously, the big news of the weekend now becomes Beau leaving. Any other thoughts on Beau leaving himself? I want to go back and retouch on the Drew aspect of this.
Yeah, I actually have a couple questions for you. You always ask the questions usually. I got
some
questions here. So, obviously, we'll talk about Drew and the anticipation that he will most likely return. We don't have any confirmation of that yet, obviously, until he puts it out there. But Do you think it's possible that in the just in case scenario that maybe they start just poking around at other potential quarterbacks on the market just to gauge interest from like a
Uh,
veteran to compete with an Ethan Grunkemeyer?
I, you know, I do wonder because Penn State is. Let's talk about a big hypothetical. What if Penn State goes on a national championship run over the next month? And if they're going to do that, it's probably because Drew Aller balled out for the next
Absolutely.
for the next 4 games. 4 games.
Yeah.
He balled out in those 4 games. If he balls out in those 4 games and Penn State wins the national championship, his draft stock goes from whatever it is right now, which seems to be a mix of a lot of people thinking he's a first round talent to a lot of people thinking probably goes in third round. It seems like the so called draft experts out there don't think he's a first round talent because you don't see him in first round mock drafts, which some of them obviously have some intel from uh, NFL teams on who they're valuing perhaps, but others believe that he is a first round talent. So it'll be interesting to see what if Drew balls out and becomes that first round talent. Does he choose to go pro at that point? Right now, my gut says after today, he's probably likely to return in 2025. But if he leaves, Penn State is put in a really tough spot where you're left with Ethan Grunkemeyer, Jackson Smolik, Beckham Kritza, who's, if he ever sees the field at Penn State, is years away from seeing the field. And then walk on Jack Lambert.
Yeah.
I mean, I did Lambert make the move to safety? I mean,
I have all the hope in the world that Ethan Grunkemeyer can be a very good college quarterback. However, my hope is not resting on it happening next year.
right, right. And, if I think Ethan could be a really good quarterback for Penn State, but thrusting your program onto a redshirt freshman with, I forget how many
He
snaps
hasn't
he
played a
saw
snap
this.
this year.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to remember if he saw it any time against
No,
like Kent State or anybody, but no.
zero.
Uh, I mean, he hasn't seen a snap this year, and suddenly you're gonna ask him potentially to take over the reins and lead your team next year. I mean, in which I think the talent on the team overall is possibly going to take us a little bit of a step back, especially defensively, depending on who leaves. But it's still a team that you look at that schedule, you look at the overall talent on the roster, should have playoff aspirations again next season. So I I don't know if they're going to. I would think it'd probably be wise to kind of figure out what's out there just in case Drew
Yeah.
um, does, ball out here and changes his, or who knows what his ultimate decision is. He may be going pro right now. We don't know. But I think right now I would lean towards him coming back. But yeah, if balls out the next month, that could absolutely change. And then Penn State's put in a really, really tough position. But I think, for Beau to enter the transfer portal, and for, Penn State's coaching staff to be pretty okay with that, because I think if Penn State didn't have a strong inkling of what Drew was going to do, I don't think we see this right now.
No, not at all.
Um, so I think it's a pretty strong indication of what Drew's going to do, because I just can't see the coaching staff, quote unquote, allowing this to happen if they think there's a legitimate, not a legitimate, but a serious chance that Drew comes back. So perhaps they already have, an ideal in place for Drew to return next year. But it could said it tons of times already. It could get interesting if Penn State goes on a run here and Drew is a major part of that.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I know this only means so much, but Bo, grew up a Penn State fan his whole life. He's from York. He ran around with a Penn State helmet on in his backyard. He showed that video, his commitment video a few years ago. Like, if he thought he had an opportunity to start for Penn State next year, I
Right.
really don't think this happens. Like,
No.
and like we said, things could change. We've said that 50 times, but you know, these things are fluid.
It's
But
yeah,
I think
exactly.
if Drew was leaning go, if Drew was leaning the NFL right now, I just can't see Bo in the portal. I think it just kind of points in that direction.
Yeah, and I think obviously NFL draft grades are already uh, in from the teams and all. Drew knows where he's projected to go as things stand right now.
Yep.
And I think that Oregon game kind of showed, there are parts of his game that at times he looks like a first overall pick. He makes elite throws. And then there are times that you're like, yeah, he still needs some work. I think personally, you look at how quarterbacks or the lack of development quarterbacks in the NFL, I think coming back for a fourth year could be really beneficial to him. I think you look at the quarterback class next year, he is easily QB1 entering the season. Probably the projected first overall pick entering the season since he is the quarterback. The only other the next best quarterback in play next year for the draft right now is Archman.
Yep. Garrett Nussmeier coming back does make things interesting because he was the guy that had a little bit of first round buzz this year. I'm guessing he was more of a day 2 guy, so he decided to come back as well.
But the other quarterbacks who are draft eligible right now include Jackson Arnold, who's barely played a ton. He hasn't played a ton yet.
No.
So we don't really know what he is. Aiden Childs of Michigan State, who, barring a major step next season, I can't see going pro.
No.
Dante Moore hasn't taken more than a couple snaps. Yes. Nico at Tennessee is ways away from being a draftable quarterback. And then it's Arch. I mean, maybe Sam Levitt's on this list, but like the QB group for next year's draft is one of the worst I've seen in a long time. Like you say, like I said, Garrett Nussmeier comes back, changes a little bit. He's obviously now in that conversation for among the top quarterbacks, but I'm still taking Drew over Arch or Garrett right now based off what we've seen out of Garrett and for the lack of what we haven't seen out of Arch. I think Arch can be really good, but I'm not going to crown the guy first overall pick right now when he has played on only a couple games.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Quinn Ewers' decision, we'll hop off this in a second because it's kind of irrelevant, but Quinn Ewers' decision will be interesting if he goes or he stays. I still think Drew is a better prospect than Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers just doesn't have the arm strength to me. But that could make things interesting next year. But yeah, like you said, like you look at the names, and to me, Drew Aller immediately becomes the best guy. We'll see there's a long ways to go to the 2026 draft, but as of right now, he's immediately like top 2 easily.
Yeah, so. Yeah, because you just look around the list too. Miller Moss, Lenore Sellers.
I do love Lenore Sellers though. I think
he's great. Malachi Nelson has barely played in his career, and he's on these lists. Connor Weigman isn't that great. There's a lot of good college quarterbacks on this list, but there's very few guys that if I'm an NFL GM that I'm trusting, my team with. And obviously this is a way off topic, but in the case of Drew, I think that has to play into the decision. You go to the draft this year, you're still competing with a couple guys to get in that first round. It's not a guarantee to be a first round pick. Mm-hmm. You come back next year, the chance of going, first round, I think are pretty damn high, and you have an opportunity to go first overall.
Yeah, and my last question for you, obviously we said Beau will have plenty of suitors, and I believe that will be true. Just off the top of your head, what are some possible spots that you think make sense for Beau Pribula?
The place I want to see him, because I think it would be a really fun fit, is West Virginia.
I think it would be a fun fit, but I also don't know with, was it Nico Marchiol? He's pretty good. He was a pretty decent for them last year. I don't know if he, that's another competition Beau would have to go into.
That is true.
But
it's hard, because I'm trying to think of what quarterback spots have been filled so far and what have not. I'm trying to think what. I can't see him ending up at any Big Ten teams.
I could. I think Wisconsin makes a lot of sense.
Wisconsin could make sense.
Indiana with Cignetti would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, those are 2 good picks.
Duke would have made sense with Manny Diaz before they took him to...
there's... I'm trying to think what programs need quarterbacks out there. Minnesota fulfilled their spot.
Is Kyle McCord leaving?
Syracuse could make sense. obviously different coaching staff there, but Syracuse was one of the schools, one of the finalists for him coming out of high school.
Rutgers, maybe? I don't
Uh,
know.
Rutgers has AK coming back, and they're pretty high on AK, even though I don't think he's Ethan Caligmanis, that is, of
Yeah.
course. Uh, UVA needs a quarterback.
And I thought they took.
They got Daniel Kalen, but
Yes, that's what
uh,
but yeah, he's probably more of
but
a long term guy.
yeah, but he I don't I help cover their recruiting, so I should probably know the rest of their quarterback room right now. But I don't think they really have a set quarterback going in next year, and their starter this year just entered the portal after getting benched at the end of the season. So Virginia needs that could be interesting. VT has drones coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I don't know. It's gonna be interesting.
Miami,
Oregon needs a new quarterback.
Oregon.
Yeah,
That would be interesting. Could you imagine the fan reaction if Beau Pribula ends up at Oregon?
it would be amazing for the September 27th Drew Aller versus Beau Pribula matchup
It
at Beaver
really
Stadium.
would. I don't know if I want to
Uh,
see it, but it really would.
I don't know. I don't think he's going to Oregon for what matters. But
Maybe a
I
Miami.
just like
I don't know if Miami needs one. I know that there was rumors about Raiola, and they were trying to tempt him to hop on the court.
we know that man we know that Cristobal doesn't like developing quarterbacks, so it wouldn't make sense.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm gonna be interested to see because I don't think there's a ton of obvious answers out there right now.
Yeah. Florida State got their guy, so they're off the table. Um, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where
Yeah.
he visits. I'm going to be tracking his visit list very closely because I think I'll have a lot of options, but I don't know. I just don't know the depth of his interest pool. If it's going to be higher level power four, mid level power four. I don't know where
What?
he sits.
Yeah, he's definitely going power four. I know that, but where? But how? Where
Where
in the
power.
power four?
Yeah.
Is he better than Brock Vandegrift right now?
That's a great question.
He could follow the Will Levis path to Kentucky?
Poor Will Levis.
I,
No one.
I would have said maybe Louisville, but they got Miller
That's a
Moss.
great pickup for Louisville. But
Yeah.
for us, real 60-second thing on Will Levis. Poor guy. Had a horrible day, and you see his ex-girlfriend was in the stand.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's a brutal day
It's
at the
tough.
office, man. That's a brutal day at the office. Pour one out for Will. But yeah. Any other things we want to touch on before we?
No, I think we touched Drew a lot there. Touched on Drew a lot there. I think we touched on the portal issue with the window quite a bit. And we touched on where, Bo could potentially end up. I think we covered a lot, probably everything we could right now. It's a lot, everything is new. This only happened an hour and a half ago.
Yeah.
So,
It's gonna be very interesting.
all right. Well, I guess we'll be back later this week to talk Penn State SMU. Big game, of course, coming up with the first round of the college football playoffs at Beaver Stadium on Saturday. Going to be interested to see how many people attend that game. It's obviously going to be well over 90,000, but is it going to break the 100,000? I think the announced attendance is going to be over 100,000, but it definitely seems like there's a lot of tickets on the secondary market for pretty cheap right now as well. And the weather is currently supposed to be decent, all things considered. So it's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. But other than that, I got nothing. You got anything else, Anthony?
Nope. Let's get out of here. We'll talk in the middle of the week.
Yep. All right. Be sure to stick tuned over at Happy Valley Insider, PennState.rivals.com for more on potentially where Beau Pribula could end up, Penn State's upcoming matchup at SMU, and the transfer portal. Penn State has hosted quite a few big names this weekend, including a pair of former USC Trojans. So that will be something to monitor over at Happy Valley Insider, PennState.rivals.com this week. And yeah, we'll be back at it later this week. Talk Penn State SMU. Till then, everybody have a good one. Enjoy the first part of your week here. And before you know it, Saturday we'll be back, and Penn State will be taking on SMU. Until then, have a good one.